All right, it's time for my disappointments, worst books of the year. With some caveats, there are some books that I've already talked about on the channel, and I just didn't feel like, kicking a book while it's down. I've already talked about it. My opinions are already fairly well known. You can find my thoughts on these books. I'll briefly mention them so that if we have similar tastes and you want to be like, why didn't Angela like this? Is this a book worth my time? You can go find out. But in this video, I'm not going to go through them. We have 9 other books that I need to get stuff off my chest about. But Fragile Threads of Power, not a thing I enjoy. Day, Fall, Night, yeah, no. Empire of Sand, big disappointment. We've got The Cruel Prince, that entire trilogy. I wanted a good fun time, was not a good fun time. And then Bone Shard War, big disappointment for a series for me. You can find my thoughts on those on my series review that I went up earlier this week. I have a DNF series video. And then specifically for Fragile Threads of Power and Day of Fall and Night, there are a lot of Friday reads where I really go in depth about those. And I'll try to have all that linked down below if you want more thoughts. But we're going to get into 9 other books that I just really need to chat about because they were either just so aggressively fine or disappointing, or they annoyed me. And I tried to order it so that I'm more annoyed near the end of the video. We'll see if that worked out, because it was really hard to list this, to rank it, because some books were bad for me for very different reasons, and it was just comparing apples and oranges. But let's start with books that were generally, their biggest problem for me was that they were so fine. And a big theme of this list is, if we're talking about them, I probably should have DNF'd them. This is the list of books that I wish I DNF'd. And I did look, most of these were for my local book club, which I know that it's well, Angela, why'd you do your local book club? Most of my favorites for the year in my top 10 video that you guys saw last week, those are from my local book club too. So I just truly can't know. It could be a favorite that I would have never picked up, or it's a book that makes me want to rage. You never know. And then some of these were for Goodreads projects and other things that I did. So not a waste of my time, but yeah, these are definitely the books that probably I should have DNF'd. Starting with a book that caused me to DNF just a whole project. This is The Daughter of Dr Maro by Sylvia Miranda Garcia. I generally don't pick up her books anymore. She's really not for me. She writes fine books. They're usually 3.5 to 4 stars. This one was more of a 3 for me. But I just never connect to the characters. The prose aren't wild for me. The ideas are okay. The most interesting thing she brings to the table is a unique setting, and I'm finding more authors that are writing in either historical Mexico or contemporary Mexico. So, I'm starting to get more of that representation in other places with just better usages of tropes and character work that work for me and my tastes. This was so forgettable to me. It was so fine, and I only finished it because I had the audiobook. I was trying to listen to it because I thought I was going to read all the Hugo books. It didn't happen, because after reading this really so okay book, I was I can't read 3 other okay books. I can't do it. I just couldn't, especially because those books I couldn't get the audiobook. This one, what can I remember about it? I've not read the original story this is based off, the Island of Dr. Moreau. The sci-fi stuff of what makes a human and things like that, and the twist are fine. They're normal. It's pretty standard sci-fi, who is a monster sort of fare. I didn't really like the coming of age story we kind of focused with on our main character. I liked when she was really young, and I kind of wish we had stayed there. I did not like the relationship dynamic that we had. I can't be convinced what the book thinks about their relationship dynamic, but it made me uncomfortable. And maybe that was the point, but regardless, it didn't make it fun. So that's something that I like. One of the few things I remember is you have 2 perspectives. There is a huge age gap between these 2 individuals, and they have a very odd relationship. I don't think it ever became romantic, because again, this book was so forgettable to me. But one of the perspectives, as the male perspective, as the main female character grows up, starts to notice her. And it just was weird. It was just weird. And I know it's historical and all that, but I didn't like that. It was okay. It was fine. Another really fine one left my brain the minute I finished it is Gallant by V.E. Schwab, because I read 2 V.E. Schwab books this year when she's quite possibly my least favorite popular author that writes for Goodreads projects. This one was at least a short audiobook, and I love gothic, spooky, haunted house places, and this was so boring. So boring. How do you make a gothic haunted house boring? How do you mess up the atmosphere? What I will give this book is the main character, I think she doesn't voice. So you have some good representation there, or at least unique representation. I guess I can't speak to if the representation was good. What else? I liked that. That was about what I liked. Yeah. I mean, especially because I've read so many gothic stories this year. Like, Starling House is not on this list. Starling House is a better version of that book. I don't know. As someone who actually, that's one of, like, my favorite type of horror things is a disturbing house. Like, Last Tale of the Flower Bride. Also a good version. There's so many. I could make such a long list of, like, gothic haunted places books that are worth your time. This one would not be one of them. It's short, so there's at least that, but I think it's incredibly forgettable, and the audiobook was only okay. So, and then my last, it's fine, but also is it book is Wayward. I read this because I thought it would be in the fantasy section for the Goodreads Choice Award. It wasn't. It was in historical fiction, and it won. And I think it's meant to be an empowering book. And I think for some readers it is. For me, I didn't feel that. And it was very, like, normal. I don't know, you have 3 perspectives. They're in 3 different points of time. And it's very obvious very early on what connects these 3 point of views. So I guess, like, that's not why you're reading it. It's not like an interesting framework in terms of, like, ooh, why am I reading about these 3 women? How are they going to intersect? It's not rocket science, I don't think. I don't think it's just, like, because I read a lot of fantasy or something. Like, I truly think it's fairly obvious why we're following these 3 people. And I think what's depressing, though, is that we're at different points in time, and these 3 women are still struggling with issues, personal and systemically, about the patriarchy, and it's really dark, and I don't know how I'm supposed to feel uplifted by the end, and I don't know. It was okay. It was just okay. It's a very readable book. The audiobook is nice, so I guess maybe that's why it works for a lot of people, but for me, it's just okay, and I think it's not as cathartic as I would want this type of story to be, but I've kind of talked about that a lot in my Goodreads project where, like, I want other things. Oh, and for the record, we also can just put as a placeholder on this list because I forgot to write them down. So this is our next one. And I'm not going to talk about all of them specifically, but the Greek retellings, oh my gosh, were they so boring to me this year. Like, oh my gosh. Oh gosh, I read Atalanta and I read Stoneblind. I liked Clytemnestra. That one was okay. But oh my goodness. For me, the formula, I'm done with it. Like, I think there's a place for it, and I don't actually want them to not exist, but the formula is boring to me, and I just can't take it anymore. Like, I actually like the myths as they are, which are short stories. They are not novels. They are short stories, except for the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are long epics, and that's different. Which is probably why, like, the ones that retell those stories are ones I like more. Like, Clytemnestra is slightly retelling the Trojan story. Not really, but, like, what we pull out of it is from the Iliad. And then Circe pulls from the Odyssey. Song of Achilles prose from the Iliad. So those, I think, since they have stronger source material, work better for me. All the other ones are just tiny little myths that we're extending to 2 hours, not 2 hours, 200 pages. Like, I can't even. I get so bored. I get so bored. So yeah, I forgot to write that on my list, but that's another placeholder. Just like the Greek retellings I had to read this year. Oh my god. So aggressively boring. So these are boring. Didn't like because, oh my god. Next up are books that, like, actively bothered me for one reason or another, and we'll start with The Frugal Wizard's Guide to Medieval England. Am I saying that right? I don't know. First of all, the title's too long. I don't like it. I don't like when titles are more than 3 words. Even if it's my favorite book, I'm still not gonna love that. This, in particular, though, is trying to be cute and gimmicky, being all Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it's just, no. My main issue here, and I don't remember, is his name John? Is his name David? I don't know. There's a generic dude who needs to have his own, like, coming to himself moment of, like, realizing he has worth on this story. You know, he has amnesia and doesn't remember who he is or what he did, blah, blah, blah. That kind of arc. He's boring. He's fine, but his one trait that just is so annoying is when he interacts with the world, he first decides in his head to give a Yelp review, essentially. And I'm like, why? And it's sort of explained in text, and there's a tiny bit of payoff, but it's just so quirky and repetitive and not funny. And I don't know, this is a thing Sanderson does with a lot of his first-person perspectives, where he really hyper-fixates on a particular internal quirk a character has when he's in first person. And that might be accurate to some people's brains. I mean, I know my brain's a very repetitive place. I would never want someone to write a first-person point-of-view story that's like my brain, because that's the whole point of art, is you make it palatable. So I don't like that. Otherwise, everything else was just very fine and normal version of this type of story of like the amnesia. Like I could see the movie. Like the movie makes sense to me. And I think that's another reason why it didn't really land, is because it's like more of an action movie type thing. But the big thing that bothered me was the main character's internal monologue. Like, oh my goodness. I was just like, really? Really? It was like David from Reckoners all over again. And I'm just like, oh. So no, it's David and Reckoners. So is this guy John? He might be John. I don't know. Okay. Then we have Our Wives Under the Sea, which isn't a bad book by any means. But this one bothered me because, and it's my fault a little bit. Like, we read this for the local book club. Everyone really enjoyed it. For me, it was 2 books smushed together, and I really liked one of the books, and I didn't really like the other one, if that makes sense. It has a dual perspective. And I liked both perspectives. Like, we have Leah and, what was her name, Miriam? Can't remember. But we have the 2 wives. And I really did like seeing both of their perspectives and getting insight. But one of them felt like a sci-fi horror where I wanted a little bit more catharsis on the ending. And the other one was like a literary fiction discussion about grief and everything's a metaphor. And that one I think ended well and made sense, and it followed all the tropes and the conventions that I'm associating with literary fiction and how it can be magical realism adjacent. But the sci-fi horror part, I'm like, I needed some answers. And I knew there wouldn't be answers. Like, I watched so many reviews for this. I knew. But it didn't matter. I still needed answers. So that bothered me. It bothered me a lot. I think it would have worked better if it was more, it kept to the literary fiction part. Because I just kept being on the edge of my seat in the sci-fi horror section of just like, yeah, why is this happening? Why? And I know the point wasn't why, but I felt like I needed it. Like, the catharsis was not there. All right. And the next one of like things where I just had like a thing that annoyed me. This is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which was another book club read that was very successful. A lot of people really liked it. But I disliked this main character with a passion. And I don't think I'm supposed to like her, if I'm being honest. I think the author effectively wrote a very unlikable, unreliable character that I just didn't like being with. She had some ideas and views and thoughts of the world that I don't think necessarily the author agrees with or anything like that. But they are not great. They are not great. Don't like that. I also, like I was talking about the previous book, I wish this one had been a different genre than what it was. And I'm going to be vague because it's technically like a mystery, literary mystery sort of book. So I don't want to like give away much about that. But it's a certain type of book and I wish it was something else. Like, and we discussed it at book club. I was like, man, I really wish it had gone this route. Like, it swerved this way and then it could have been a really interesting story. Now, that said, it's a very well done translation and actually has some translations about translations in the story. It does have moments that are really cool. And I really liked some of the sentences. So I could read another book by this author, but this character did not, it was a lot for me. It was a lot of work and I enjoyed the conversation. I did not enjoy my time reading this book. Okay. And now 3 books that like, I think kind of were really unpleasant experiences for me. One of them is The Unmaking of June Pharaoh. I really don't like this book. I don't like it for a couple reasons. And I feel like one of the reasons is not fair to the book. And full disclosure, I don't think it's fair. But at the same time, it was a part of my reading experience. So I read it because it was on the short list and the long list for the Goodreads Choice Award in Fantasy. And so I'm reading this book. It's my first Adrienne Young book. I know they've written other fantasy books. I guess I kind of realized, oh, they're really popular. I didn't know they were this popular, but here we go. And I'm reading it. It's contemporary. There's some weird stuff happening. And then suddenly it's a science fiction story. And at no point is there a fantasy element. At no point, unless you think time travel is a fantasy element, which it's not. It's not. I'm sorry, I'm not to gatekeep speculative elements, but time travel is science fiction. That's what it is. I don't care if you go back in time. Like, Outlander is not a fantasy book. Outlander is a historical fiction that uses time travel. So you can maybe put it in sci-fi. And so then this, Unmaking of June Pharaoh, should have either been historical fiction or science fiction or some combination of the two. But at no point is it a fantasy book. And I know that's not the book's fault that I thought it would be a fantasy book. But it annoyed me. So then, I'm trying to understand why this book's on this list. And I'm trying to read it. And I'm just bored. Oh my God. Am I bored? And it shouldn't be boring. Okay, the premise of this book is this woman is in a family full of women who are always cursed. They are inevitably going to lose their connection to their reality. Okay, it's like, it feels kind of like Alzheimer's, but it's not quite like Alzheimer's. It's not medically something they can figure out, but it happens to every woman in this family. and it's going to happen to her soon. Okay, that sounds interesting, right? That sounds interesting. Yeah, no, that's it. No, nothing's interesting. She's really boring. Like, she's a very boring character. There's a version of her that, like, I see from afar that seems way more interesting. So yeah, and there's fish out of water scenarios that I don't think really land well. There's a romance that I could see making this, like, this, it could make the book work better if you care about it. I didn't care about it. I didn't care about the romance. I didn't care about anything in this book. There's a mystery component. Didn't care about that. And also, it's, like, I watch time travel things. I watch a lot of Doctor Who. I've watched this type of concept done so well. And this is so dry and boring. And anyways, so I think it's objectively not very good. But it did suffer extra by me needing to read a book that was so not deserving of being on the list that it was. Like, yes, I know Goodreads misshelves things all the time. Yes, I know it's a popularity contest, but goodness. Goodness. Okay, another one. Witch King by Martha Wells, which no one's really seen me talk about yet. Because I didn't really bring it up in my Goodreads video, and I haven't done a wrap-up yet. I haven't done a Friday Reads in a while because we have all these other videos to do. Yeah, I hated this book. Like, mostly because I had to finish it. For no reason other than myself. Like, to be fair. I didn't have to. But I did. And it just kept putting me to sleep. And I was so... I don't know. I don't know what the point of it was. I have never so heavily skimmed, checked out of a book in my life. So let's see if we can discuss what this book is about. And let's also start by saying I like convoluted, complex things. That's kind of part of my brand. Okay? Like, I really like Nine Fox Gambit. I really like Chorus of Dragons. I like things that don't make sense. I like being dropped into world building and having to collect context clues. I've read 6 Malazan books. I am a reader who does not get scared by these things, who also thinks it's kind of fun, okay? That did not work well for me in this world building, probably because I don't think it's that exciting. Like, it's not that different from other fantasy worlds, other than there's just new words I have to learn. Like, it's a story about a time where people lose battles against a big bad, but aren't they the big bad now? Because I don't know, there's elf-adjacent creatures. Like, everything, it's okay. It's a slightly different version of a fantasy world you've seen before with words you're not familiar with, so it makes it a little bit more obtuse. So I didn't love that. That's not a very fascinating world. Like, I'd read The Will of the Many recently, and I thought that was a way more interesting take on a lot of the themes and the approach of world building that is in this book. A little more accessible, a little more interesting and engaging, and you have questions that you want answers to. Okay, and this also has, like, soul-swapping, body-swapping sort of stuff because of the necromancy. Okay, have that all over the place in Chorus of Dragons, and here I'm just like, okay, I don't get it. I don't get why we're doing this. I don't get what the payoff is. And I think part of the problem is, like, I have felt no character connections anywhere. Like, if in theory we have a team of people working to accomplish a goal, and I have never... It's felt like watching a Mission Impossible movie. And, like, Mission Impossible movies are good. Just like this book's probably good. Like, it's a Martha Wells book. She's a good writer. She crafts good characters and good worlds. And I mean, me not liking this is not me saying that this is a bad book. But... just like a Mission Impossible movie is a good movie, that doesn't mean it has anything that I'm connecting to. Mission Impossible movies, they are just their plot. They are fancy. They are shiny. And that's how I feel here, where it's like, I have a team of characters that in theory is cohesive, that in theory is a found family, but I don't feel it, I don't believe it. And I think that's what was happening here. It's like, I'm being told, and I can kind of see why they're connected, but I don't get it. I didn't get anyone's motivations. I was like, why is anyone doing anything? I don't understand. Like, I don't get why we care. I don't know why you're doing what you're doing. I don't care. That was the issue. I never cared. And it's not a long book, and it took so long for me to finish. Like, truly. It was not a good time for me. It was so different from the Murderbot novellas I've read. So it hasn't turned me off from reading other books that she's written, but, like, when I read in the acknowledgments about how, like, this was a book that almost didn't happen and it had no trajectory, I'm like, yeah, it didn't feel like it had a trajectory. I still don't know what the point of this book was. I still don't get it. I still don't know why we were doing what we were doing. Like, I can kind of give you an answer. Like, if someone... But, like, in terms of, like, why it needed to be a 400-page book, No, this should have been a novella or like a 250-page book. There was so much stuff in here that didn't need to be here. So much. And it's just needlessly convoluted so that you lose, I think, the point. Like, I don't think this book knows what it wanted the reader to connect with, personally. So, anyways, didn't like it. Not a fan. The last one is actively a book that I consider giving a 1 star pretty often, but the book club discussion was pretty good, so like it gets like bonus points for that. And that is The Cat Who Saves Books. Yeah, I really don't like this one. I try to think about the fact that it's not an American book. So it's some of my dislike because culturally I'm not connected to what the reading experience is like for a consumer in Japan, because it's a Japanese translated book, and we can assume there's probably a disconnect there. But this book legit told me you can't listen to books while I was listening to the audiobook, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. Like, this book was gatekeeping what it means to be someone who loves books, and the right way to read books, and the right way to collect books, the right way to be a consumer. All of these conversations we have on the bookish internet all the time, all of them incredibly surface level, and all of them kind of not, like, making complete sense to me and passing the sniff test. On top of that, it's kind of just this whimsical story of exploring grief that really didn't land for me, and I say that as someone who loves stories that explore grief, and someone who was literally going through moments of grief at the time of reading the story. So it just really wasn't landing for me. I was not relating to this character who didn't feel like a kid. And it was also, like, there's a lot of suspension of disbelief here of, like, this kid, a teenager, is just left on his own. His aunt checks in once in a while. It felt like a story that would have served me better in either an animated, or television version. Probably animated, I think, would be a little bit better. Because then you have music and art that can help with the whimsy. Otherwise, all I heard was the pretentious discussion about books and what it's like to read a book and what it means to love books and how the classics are so good. And it's just, like I said, it didn't feel like an inclusive version of, yeah, we're all readers. We all love to read. Books are a great way to connect with people. Books are a great way to escape for healing. And also, if you're here for a cat, the cat is barely there. Like, it's barely there. So I really didn't like this book. It didn't work for me. The whimsy did not whimsy. All I heard was the loud themes that I just actively didn't agree with. And again, we can chalk this up to the fact that there might just be a cultural disconnect, but I think probably the cultural problem is that I'm on the bookish internet. And so we have these conversations all the time, and I am, like, not about the gatekeeping life. I truly am not. You read 2 books a year, you're a reader. You read 200, you're a reader. You use the library all the time, great. You collect every book you want to read or never want to read, fine. You read only classics, you read only new books. None of this matters to me. It matters a lot to this book, and I don't like it. And yeah, it's probably my least favorite book of the year, probably. At least it's the one that angers me thematically the most. So, yep, per usual, I feel like I probably said this caveat at the beginning, but these are just opinions about art. Art is supposed to make us feel good things, bad things, some things. So, and if you have similar tastes to me or similar complaints, this can help you, prioritize your time. Or if you're just really curious and want to suffer with me and try a book, go for it. What were some of your disappointments, misses, books you really didn't like this year? Leave those down below. If you want to just leave an emoji to let me know you're here. Oh, I don't know. I'll leave a cat for The Cat Who Saved Books. I guess that's fine. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.